Well, hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle. Welcome to the Virtue Signal. I'm here with my friend and associate reporting live from the Emerald City, Alfonso Rachel. And we have a fun topic, I think, for us today, Zoe. As we record this, the 4th of July weekend is about upon us, the glorious 4th. And what I would like to do is spend some time talking about the American Revolution, because it's a really unusual revolution. In fact, I think, as far as I can tell in history, it's a unique revolution. And I think the thing that's most astonishing about the American Revolution is the fact that it came from the top down. I can't think of another case where this happened. When I did the studying that I've done on the Nazis, on the communists, the revolution in Cuba, all of it, what you find is the revolution is driven by intellectuals, dispossessed, many of them with a long history of crime, if not outright terrorism. They're mean-spirited, they're bloody, they're bent on revenge, and they want that blood of the people that they're in rebellion against. But the American Revolution is just strange. Just as one small example, the leaders of the Soviet Revolution, the Russian Revolution, people like Lenin, Trotsky, Molotov, Stalin, all of these names are pseudonyms, and they're pseudonyms because these people have been running from the police forever. And you contrast that with the American Revolution, where you've got the most famous people in the country, and this is the point, this is the entire point, and the people with the most to lose. You've got wealthy landowners, you've got lawyers, you've got silversmiths, you've got brewers, you've got all of that. These guys had something to lose. And finally, they're not, if you look at what they were in rebellion against, if you think of things like the French Revolution, you think of like these starving people in the streets, and just these half-naked children in the gutters of Paris and all the rest of it. This revolution was started because of a philosophical outrage, not like our lives are miserable, we got nothing to lose. It seems like it is the inverse of every single other revolution I can think of, and I think that's why it's so wonderful. It was a bloodless revolution. I'm not talking about the combat in the Revolutionary War. I'm talking about most revolutions. Once the revolution has happened, the people of the old regime are just lined up against the wall and shot, and that didn't happen either.
Indeed, man. The thing about rebellion is that these people weren't the rebellion didn't start with them. The rebellion didn't start with the people. And it's difficult. I mean, I know that's what we use. We use the term rebellion, and I'm one of those who has reservations about what the world comes to mean, because that's me going along with what the world dictates to what it is. And oftentimes the world ends up being wrong. But what happened is you have the people who had the power or assumed the power who was actually in rebellion against the people. That's where the rebellion started. The rebellion was the one with the seat of power says, you know what? I'm going to rebel against this idea that you have any rights. I'm going to rebel against your dreams. I'm going to rebel against the fruits of your labor. I am going to simply rebel against you and lord over you. Rebellion isn't a natural state. That's the thing about it. The universe itself didn't begin with rebellion. Rebellion was something when it wasn't satisfied, or it didn't feel like it had enough when it already had plenty. And so if we take it, to the word of God, there was nothing really justifiable to rebel against. What you had was straight up goodness. It doesn't get any better than this. Well, you know what? I want my own truth. My pride tells me that I can ascend north of your throne. In my rebellion, I will challenge your truth. Why? What for? Right? There's no point in doing that, but greed, pride, rebellion, that's what it all came down to. But I understand that there's a righteous sense of rebellion, and I get all that. However, like I said, the natural state to be in isn't in rebellion itself. When you already have goodness and people decide that they want to rebel, then we got problems. We got problems with that, with rebellion right now in America. America, man, this is as good as it's going to get. The Constitution talks about rebellion. The Bible talks about rebellion. And what we have is these rebellious ideas concerning what people have a right to, in the pursuit of their happiness. Usually it's in pursuit of somebody else's happiness. And once again, we get down to rebellion again. So all that to say, Bill, when we have what led to what we have here in America, yeah, one could say, like I said, it was a good kind of rebellion, but it happened because of a rebellion against the people first.
That's a really excellent point. I don't think I've ever heard it put that way before, but that's an excellent point. What had caused the American Revolution was that the king had altered the deal. Pray I do not alter it further. Yeah, but that's basically what happened. And in that respect, another rebellion, independence movement was very similar to that, and that's the independence of Texas. A bunch of Americans moved down to Mexico, Texas being in Mexico at the time. And basically, had been assured by the Mexican government that they would have their rights protected and get to vote and all the rest of it. And they were perfectly happy to be Mexicans to that degree. And then along comes Santa Anna and all these draconian restrictions on liberty and all of this, old world imperial kind of stuff. And the Texans just said, that's not what we agreed to, and we're not leaving. So there is that aspect of it. But the thing about the American Revolution to me is I don't know how else to put this, is the moral purity of it. And the 4th of July is the pinnacle of what I consider to be like political purity for a number of reasons. When you read the Declaration of Independence, first of all, it's a declaration of independence. It's not a series of terrorist attacks, It's not like overrunning the king's governor's house and murdering everybody and killing everybody. It is an extremely adult, extremely well thought out, and extremely morally pure statement. That's what it is. It's a group of very smart men speaking on behalf of a young country, saying, we now find this intolerable, and here's why we're leaving. By the way, we made many attempts to not have to do this, but since those attempts were ignored, this is why we're going. And that aspect of being upfront about it and being manly about it, this is it. And of all the things about the American Revolution, the thing that is the most astonishing to me, as I said before, it comes from the top down. The people who were the founding fathers were all men of prominence, men who had something to lose. But the thing that is most impressive to me about the 4th of July is the fact that everybody there signed their name to that document. And famously enough, when it came time for John Hancock to sign the document, John Hancock takes like a third of the entire area, He just completely bogarts the whole thing, just this huge signature. And when they asked him why he had written his name, why he put his John Hancock down so prominently, he said, it's because I've heard King George, has ailing eyesight. And I want him to be able to be certain that he reads my name correctly. Mm-hmm. That's an act of absolute courage, and there's a cleanliness to it, a transparency and a can't quite put my fingers on it, but you know where I'm going with this, right?
Indeed. And that's one of the reasons why it's a pet peeve of mine, if I could just, say it bluntly, between the terms rebels and radicals. And, like I said, the Constitution has issues with rebellion. It has issues with rebels. The Bible has issues with rebels. And there seems to be this flip around between rebels and radicals. Like, see, I think of myself as a radical. The Bible talks about radicals in terms of, we're talking about a root. You need to be rooted in something, right? Rooted in something when we talk about this moral purity, when we talk about the purity of what's in nature, and when we're talking about, how the founding documents acknowledge nature's God. This is something to be rooted in, something to be solid. It has a core. And when you have that, that means that that's when you're talking about true radicalism. That's what we have. We have a root. We have something solid. We have the supreme law of the land that is based on the word of God. Even in the Declaration, they acknowledge we're appealing to the supreme judge in the world of the world. This has a core. It has a root. It's not like anything else. It's not like anything else. People can talk about radical socialism. They can talk about radical Islam. It's a misnomer. Right? It's empty. And I'll tell you why. Because what is the root of socialism? There is no root. You can't satisfy it. That's the problem. It's a hollow core. It doesn't have any. How are you going to satisfy the root of anybody's selfishness? You can't. You can't satisfy the root of anybody's covetousness. It's a bottomless pit. You can't. But our Constitution, it survives because it's built on the foundation of the cornerstone himself, Jesus. That's where it was built. So it has something solid. That's why it's sustained for so long. So now, of course, we're built in the natural, and everything in the natural has a shelf life. But when we have that radical perspective of that, when we have that root, when we have that core, that's when the radicals are prepared to take extreme measures to stand up against the extreme measures of rebellion and rebels. That's where the extremists of radicalism really comes in. And that's the posture that I take from it.
And that's another good point that certainly needs to be repeated as often as possible, especially on this holiday. Is that when they decided to cut their ties with England, it wasn't like they were saying, we are removing ourselves from your law, and either we're going to be lawless or we'll make our own laws. That's not what they said at all. They basically said, over time, King George, your political laws have come into conflict with the higher law, with natural law. They have come into conflict with the natural law that applies to every single human being on the earth. The ability to basically do what they want to do unless they're harming somebody else. The ability to keep most of their money. Their ability to have representation from the people that have authority over them. They didn't look at this as like the abandonment of a system of law. They basically told King George, we're taking this to a higher court. And when I say a higher court, I don't mean the court of public opinion, although that's what the Declaration was entirely about. It was making it clear to other nations and to our own people, this is why we're doing this, and we're putting it in writing, and we're doing it, we're announcing it before we do it. So everything that comes out of that, everything in the Constitution comes out of that idea that we are no longer going to be bound by the whims of a fallible human being. We're going to the universal moral core, and from the Declaration in the Constitution, you find something that many people, even many conservatives, don't fully realize, and that is that the Constitution does not grant us any rights. None. It does not give us any rights at all. All it does is state specifically how the government cannot take away the natural rights that we're all born with. This is a profound distinction. The idea that the government can take away your right to free speech is insane, because the government doesn't give us the right to free speech, and the Constitution doesn't give us the right to free speech. The Constitution says the right of free speech shall not be impinged. The right to defend yourself shall not be impinged. All of it. It's an understanding that there is a universal bedrock, this kind of universal code of morality. And when I say universal, the men that wrote this document had spent years, and not to mention the months, during the actual convention and so on. They had studied the Romans, the Greeks. They took things that they liked about the British and things they didn't like. Things about the French government they liked. They knew what they were talking about when they said there appears to be a universal code of morality, and we are going to base this country on that code and structure it in such a way that any deviation from the code will be the signal for people to do this again.
Indeed, man. And and one cool thing about the 4th of July is the radical fireworks. We want to see some rad fireworks, man. That's what we want to see. And and these, this eclectic soup, of ideas concerning a self-governing nation, and how we would establish this republic. Even all that still has to be rooted in something. And, you gotta funnel that down. And once you pass it through the sieve, we find that it will only work if you understand that these rights do not come from man. They come from God, right? The author of nature, the one who designed nature. Because here's the thing about nature. Nature itself doesn't have a moral code.
No, it does not care.
Right? It does not care. It's like survival of the fittest, if we want to get down to it, right? So even nature can't give you a moral code. It can't give you this thing to go by. Only the author of it who can write the moral code that goes along with nature. Who among man can write the moral code? Nobody can. Even as far as the Romans go, as far as the Greek goes, you're still going to have a person who is going to assume to be a god. That's why, so when people on a side note, when people try to use Jesus to say, well, Jesus was for taxes because, look at what he said about rendering under Caesar what is Caesar's. People totally misunderstand what that means. Jesus wasn't saying, oh yeah, you should be totally paying taxes to the state and give Caesar what he's entitled to. No, that's not what he was saying at all, not even close. What he was saying to the Herodians was, hey, let me see that coin. So they gave him the coin. And he says, and basically what he's pointing to is this. Do you notice that this coin says worshipful son of the god Augustus? I'm not telling you to pay taxes. What I'm telling you is that you don't owe Caesar anything, and you owe God everything, because what you just handed me is the picture of a false god. This is idolatry, and it does not square with my commandments for you, you hypocrites. So you guys are trying to tax me in a tax issue when you guys have totally misunderstood the law concerning idolatry. So these people were gods, and they can do with people whatever they want. So the founding fathers have to make sure that they have discernment concerning that too. So yes, all this, the bottom line, it goes down to the exclusive moral writer, because nobody among man can write it and square with somebody else. My morality against your morality? No. The buck has to stop with somebody, and it stops with the one who came and gave his blood for it.
Yeah. So when he said render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, what he's basically saying is this is a piece of metal. Mm-hmm. It has whatever value we decide to put on it, but it's a piece of metal. Mm-hmm. This is not something that can be worshipped. It's of this world, and he has some control over that, but he doesn't have control over the other stuff. Mm-hmm. So on a final note, there's one thing I think that I'd like to talk about briefly, and that is that many critics of America today point out things like the Star-Spangled Banner being written from the War of 1812. Our national anthem is a story of a battle. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. That's really all it is. It's a story of a battle. Mm-hmm. At least the first stanza of it is. Our symbol for the revolution is the Minuteman, which is a guy with a rifle. There's this constant criticism of the American founding and the iconography of it and so on. And people just say, it's so warlike. We should change the national anthem to America the Beautiful, and all the rest of this stuff. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is the reason there was a Revolutionary War, the reason that there were Minutemen with rifles, right? The reason we talk about the Star-Spangled Banner is because freedom has to be fought for. It's not just something that lies on the ground and you pick up. It requires effort. And when I say it requires blood, I don't like the sound of that because there's something very satanic about that. But what it does require is it requires the commitment to an ideal that you put above your life. Because if you're going to go out to war over something and you're not being compelled to do it, then you better believe in what you're going for, because you know what you're facing, and in this particular case, you're facing the most powerful military force on the earth. That idea, because I thought of this when you mentioned the fireworks and the bombs bursting in there. That's what we're celebrating. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, "Oh, Americans just like loud noises and flashy things." And we say, "Well, yes, we do, because they're cool, and it sure beats sitting around reading a moth-eaten book in a cafe drinking bad coffee."
Word.
But my point is that is that there is a certain amount of violence built into the celebration of the American Revolution, and that had to be there because you're fighting against an oppressive force for your freedom. But that violence was never used against civilians, at least on our part. It was never used in retribution. It was never used as justification for big purges and murders and all the other stuff that's accompanied all these other revolutions in history. Even the violence inherent in the American Revolution is justified and morally secure.
Amen, Bill. And you know, I can't remember her name, man, but she tried to give some nonsense about God being imperfect, because if he was a perfect God, he would have written in the commandments, thou shalt not have war. Right? These are the same kind of, half-cocked people who say that, God is anti-woman, because if he was really a good God, he would have put something in the commandments like thou shalt not rape, which, the Bible speaks very, very badly about rape. But I won't go into that. But if they really would have looked at the commandments closer, they would notice that the commandments say thou shalt not covet and thou shalt not steal. These things add up to rape. But anyway, God's got that covered. But they said don't put that God left out war. Thou shalt not have war. It's like, okay. Now, how do you enforce that law? That's the problem. So, even with God, and we read in the Old Testament, and there's in the New Testament too, when people think about this hippie Jesus and stuff like that, they haven't read the whole thing. It's going to be a very bloody war. And leading up to that in the Old Testament too, there's bloody wars. Why? Because you simply do not have people who respect other people's rights.
That's it.
People don't seem to understand that. And for even these, and it's sad, man, because you'll have, say, for instance, Canaan. You actually have people who think that the Canaanites were just these peaceful people that God sent Israelites out there to slaughter for no reasons. No, they don't care that the Canaanites were burning their children alive and that they had sexual entitlements and they had grotesque breeding practices and all the sort of all the heathenistic things that they were doing. That was a totally oppressive and disease spreading lifestyle. They don't care about that. No, all they see is just people out there just enjoying nature and doing what came natural to them and all that sort of stuff. So yes, God had the Israelites go in there and go scorched earth on them before their evil spread to other people. This is what happens when you don't. It's baffling how pacifists, they can be so dyslexic about how people who are peaceful and who are warmongers. It's really sad. But yeah, all that to say, Bill, that's why we have America, because throughout history, you've had people who have lorded over people, exercised these divine rights of kings and stuff like that, and have societies that are given over. You have your elite class that are given over to basically doing whatever they want. And no, that's not going to cut it. It's going to take some fireworks.
No, absolutely. The idea that you can sit in your backyard and have a barbecue with friends without any fear of being shelled or having a sniper pick off your wife as she heads out to the grocery store, or any of these other things that have plagued the world from the beginning of time. The reason that those things don't happen here is because we fought for this. We paid for it. And it seems to me that much of the damage that's occurring now is, frankly, because we stopped paying for it. There are people out there right at this moment, as we record this and as you watch it, no matter when you watch it, right now, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who out there who have put themselves in harm's way so that those of us at home don't have to be in harm's way. And I know we have a Memorial Day and I know we have a Veterans Day, and this is not about them specifically, but it is about understanding that we celebrate freedom and independence because they were fought for, and not because they were granted or because they happen to be lying around on the ground. The thing that the people that Zoe just mentioned, the pacifists and the people who cannot see an enemy even as that person is cutting your throat, is that they do not understand the hardest thing to do in terms of human nature. The hardest thing to do in human nature is to have good people, decent people, people who don't want to harm anyone, people who want to be left alone and let other people do what they want to do, and yet have those people be capable of inflicting violence without becoming monsters themselves in order to defend this thing that makes all of this decency and kindness possible in the first place. That ability of free people to fight for what they want and then not become the monsters that they're fighting is the greatest miracle in human history. And you and I and Zoe and everybody else, at least here in America, we're a big part of that, and we carry an obligation that comes with our gifts. For Alfonso, Rachel, I'm Bill Whittle. This show is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, to whom we're very, very grateful. If you'd like to join us, we'd certainly love to have you. We'll see you next time right here on The Virtue Signal.